What if I told you that Ridley Scott's 1985 fantasy masterpiece Legend was almost destroyed by a fire that claimed most of the original footage? What if the movie you've been watching for decades isn't the version the director wanted you to see? Legend isn't just a cult classic about unicorns and darkness. It's a production nightmare that pushed Tom Cruise to his breaking points, cost millions more than expected, and hid secrets that even die-hard fans never discovered. From the shocking truth about those prosthetics to the alternate soundtrack that changed everything, we're counting down 20 secrets about Legend that have been hidden for decades. These revelations will completely transform how you watch this dark fairy tale. So hit that like button, and let's step into the forest of forgotten truths. Number 20. The fireball that almost ended everything. Let's start with the disaster that almost killed Legend before anyone saw it. On the morning of June 27, 1984, a catastrophic fire ripped through Stage 3 at Pinewood Studios in England, destroying the entire forest set. But here's the truly terrifying part. The blaze didn't just consume wood and paint, it nearly destroyed all the original film negatives that had already been shot. Ridley Scott and his team had spent months building the most elaborate fantasy forest ever constructed for cinema, complete with real trees, hand-sculpted rocks, and working streams. The set cost over $2 million alone, and losing it meant potentially losing the entire production. Fire investigators later determined that the blaze was caused by an electrical fault in the lighting rig, but the damage was done. Scott had to make a brutal decision: abandon the project or rebuild everything from scratch. Universal Studios executives were ready to pull the plug entirely. The insurance payout barely covered half the reconstruction costs. Yet Scott convinced them to continue, arguing that they'd already invested too much to quit. The rebuilt set was actually bigger and more elaborate than the original, which explains why some scenes have noticeably different lighting and atmosphere compared to others. Those differences, they're literally showing you before and after the apocalypse. Number 19. Tom Cruise's teeth were glued shut.
License, jets, a bunch of different airplanes.
Tom Cruise suffered for his art in ways you cannot imagine. To achieve Jack's innocent, boyish look, the makeup department made a decision that sounds like medieval torture. They fitted Cruise with prosthetic teeth caps that were literally glued to his natural teeth every single morning. These weren't simple slip-on veneers. They were custom-sculpted dental appliances that required special adhesive to stay in place during the physically demanding 13-hour shooting days. The glue was so strong that removing the caps each night became an agonizing ordeal that left Cruise's gums bleeding and inflamed. Worse yet, the adhesive contained chemicals that triggered severe allergic reactions, causing his mouth to swell up between takes. The production dentist had to stay on set full-time just to monitor Cruise's dental health and apply emergency treatments when the reactions became too severe. Ridley Scott wanted Jack to have a more ethereal, otherworldly appearance, believing that slightly altered teeth would make Cruise look less modern and more fairy-tale-ish. But the cost was brutal. Cruise lost 12 pounds during filming, partly because eating with the prosthetics was nearly impossible. He survived mostly on protein shakes and soup consumed through a straw during lunch breaks. This commitment to physical transformation despite the agony is what helped establish Cruise as a serious actor willing to endure anything for his craft. Number 18. There were two completely different soundtracks. Legend has one of the most bizarre dual soundtrack stories in cinema history. When Ridley Scott completed the film, it featured a traditional orchestral score by legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith, who'd created iconic music for Alien, Star Trek, and Planet of the Apes. Goldsmith spent 6 months crafting a sweeping classical fairy tale score with full orchestra and choir. Scott loved it. European audiences saw this version when Legend premiered in late 1985. But American studio executives at Universal watched test screenings and panicked. They believed Goldsmith's traditional score made the film feel too old-fashioned for young American audiences who were embracing synthesizer music and MTV culture. Without consulting Scott or Goldsmith, they commissioned German electronic band Tangerine Dream to create an entirely new soundtrack using only synthesizers and electronic instruments. Tangerine Dream had just 3 weeks to compose, record, and deliver a complete replacement score. The American theatrical release in May 1986 featured this electronic soundtrack, making it essentially a different movie. The two versions create completely different emotional experiences. Goldsmith's orchestral score emphasizes the film's darkness and tragedy, while Tangerine Dream's synth-heavy approach makes it feel dreamlike and surreal. For decades, fans debated which version was correct until the director's cut finally restored Goldsmith's intended score. This dual soundtrack situation remains one of Hollywood's most disrespectful treatments of both a director's vision and a composer's work. Number 17. Mia Sara was only 16 during filming. Mia Sara's casting as Princess Lily raises eyebrows today because she was shockingly young during production. Sara was only 16 years old when filming began, playing opposite 22-year-old Tom Cruise in scenes that required mature romantic chemistry and, in some interpretations, sensual undertones. This age gap created serious complications on set that the production tried desperately to hide from the media. British child labor laws required that Sara have a guardian present during all filming, limited her working hours to 8 per day, and mandated regular breaks for tutoring sessions since she was still technically school-aged. Ridley Scott had to completely restructure the shooting schedule around these restrictions, often filming Sara's scenes first thing in the morning when she was freshest and most alert. The romantic scenes between Jack and Lily required special choreography and careful camera angles to avoid anything that might appear inappropriate given Sara's age. Tom Cruise reportedly felt uncomfortable during some of the more intimate moments, knowing Sara was still in high school. The production hired an intimacy coordinator decades before such positions became standard in Hollywood, specifically to ensure Sara felt safe and protected. Studio executives initially wanted an older actress like Jennifer Connelly, who was 18 at the time, but Scott insisted Sara's genuine innocence and youth were perfect for Lily's character arc from naive princess to darkness-touched woman. Sara's actual 16th birthday occurred during production, and the cast and crew threw her a surprise party on the forest set. Number 16. The unicorns were mechanical nightmares. Those beautiful, mystical unicorns that captivated audiences weren't magical at all. They were animatronic nightmares that broke down constantly and nearly drove the special effects team to resignation. Rob Bottin, the legendary effects artist who created the creatures for The Thing, designed the unicorns as a combination of real horses wearing prosthetic horns and fully mechanical animatronic replicas for close-up shots. The animatronic unicorns each weighed over 600 pounds and required 8 puppeteers working simultaneously to create realistic movement. The horn alone contained 47 individual moving parts to create the subtle spiral texture and light-reflecting properties Scott demanded. But these mechanical beasts hated the forest set's humidity and moisture. The electronics would short out multiple times per day, forcing technicians to completely disassemble and dry out the internal mechanisms between takes. Worse, the prosthetic horns attached to real horses kept falling off during action scenes because the adhesive couldn't withstand the animal's natural head movements. The production went through 17 different adhesive formulas before finding one that worked reliably. One animatronic unicorn completely caught fire during filming when its internal motors overheated, destroying months of fabrication work and causing another costly production delay. The most frustrating part was that each unicorn could only operate for about 12 minutes before overheating, meaning Scott had to shoot unicorn scenes in tiny fragments and piece them together in editing, making those flowing, magical moments you see on screen actually the result of hundreds of separate takes stitched together. Number 15. Tim Curry spent 5 hours daily in makeup.
Does the gown not please you?
Tim Curry's transformation into darkness remains one of cinema's most impressive practical makeup achievements, but the process was absolutely torturous. Every single day of filming, Curry had to report to the makeup trailer at 3 in the morning for a 5-hour application process that turned him into the Lord of Darkness. Rob Bottin and his team created a full-body prosthetic suit that included false muscles, demonic skin texture, and those iconic massive horns. The horns alone weighed over 40 pounds and were attached directly to a fiberglass skull cap glued to Curry's head. This meant Curry was literally carrying 40 pounds of weight on his neck and skull for 12 to 14 hours straight during shooting days. The red body paint used on the prosthetics contained toxic chemicals that caused severe skin reactions, forcing the makeup team to develop a special barrier cream that had to be applied and dried before the prosthetics could even be attached. Curry's face was completely encased in foam latex that prevented normal facial expressions, so he had to dramatically exaggerate every movement to convey emotion through the makeup. The prosthetics also trapped heat against his body, causing Curry to experience dangerous overheating episodes where his core temperature would spike to 102 degrees. The production kept a medical team on standby specifically to monitor Curry's vital signs. Removing the makeup each night took another 3 hours and left Curry's skin raw and damaged, requiring special medical treatments just to prevent permanent scarring from the daily adhesive application and removal. Number 14. The film was originally 3 hours long. Ridley Scott's original cut of Legend ran for an epic 3 hours and 5 minutes, making it longer than his director's cut of Blade Runner. This extended version contained massive sections of story and character development that completely changed the narrative's meaning and emotional impact. The original cut included extensive backstory for Darkness, revealing that he was once an angel who fell from grace and became corrupted by jealousy of humanity's capacity for light and love. These scenes gave Tim Curry nearly 20 additional minutes of dialogue and character exploration, transforming Darkness from a simple villain into a tragic, fallen figure worthy of empathy. There were also entire subplots involving additional goblins and forest creatures who helped Jack on his quest, making the journey feel more epic and populated. Universal Studios executives watched this 3-hour version and declared it completely unmarketable to American audiences, demanding Scott cut it down to 90 minutes for the U.S. theatrical release. Scott reluctantly complied, but refused to cut the European release, which ran at 113 minutes and retained much more character development. The cutting process was emotionally devastating for Scott, who compared it to dismembering his own child. Key scenes showing Lily's internal struggle between darkness and light were removed entirely, reducing her character to a simple damsel in distress rather than the complex figure Scott intended. The director's cut, released on DVD in 2002, partially restored some of this lost footage, but approximately 45 minutes of completed finished scenes remain missing to this day because Universal reportedly destroyed the original film elements. Number 13. The movie bombed at the box office. Legend was an absolute financial disaster that nearly ended Ridley Scott's career as a bankable director. The film cost approximately $30 million to produce, an enormous budget for 1986, but only grossed $15.5 million domestically during its entire theatrical run. This catastrophic loss meant Universal Studios lost roughly $35 million after marketing and distribution costs were factored in. The failure was so severe that Tom Cruise's team actively tried to distance him from the project, fearing it would damage his rising star power following Top Gun's massive success just 1 month earlier. Ridley Scott went from being one of Hollywood's most sought-after directors after Alien and Blade Runner to being considered a financial liability who couldn't deliver commercially successful films. Universal executives blamed Scott's difficult creative vision and lengthy production timeline for the disaster, which created a reputation that made it difficult for Scott to secure funding for his next projects. The film's failure was particularly crushing because Scott had poured his heart into creating what he considered his most personal and artistic work. Critics were divided, with many dismissing it as style over substance, while others praised its visual artistry but found the story simplistic. The poor box office performance meant that planned merchandising deals were canceled, action figures were never produced, and a proposed animated series based on the film died in development. It took nearly 2 decades of home video sales and DVD releases for Legend to find its audience and achieve cult classic status. Number 12. Real Gold Leaf covered the sets. Ridley Scott's obsession with authenticity reached absurd levels with Legend's set design. The interior of Darkness's palace was decorated with genuine 24-karat gold leaf applied to columns, walls, and decorative elements throughout the massive set. Scott insisted that real gold would reflect light differently than painted or spray-painted alternatives, creating a more authentic and visually stunning environment. The production purchased over 12,000 sheets of gold leaf at a cost of approximately $200,000 just for decorative purposes. Skilled craftsmen spent 3 months applying the delicate gold leaf by hand, using traditional techniques dating back to Renaissance art restoration. This extravagant choice meant that every time a scene needed reshooting or the set required modifications, they were literally destroying and rebuilding gold-covered surfaces. Studio executives were furious when they discovered this expense buried in the production budget, considering it an outrageous waste of money that audiences would never fully appreciate on screen. But Scott argued that the subtle richness and warmth of real gold created an atmosphere that couldn't be faked, and that the actors would perform differently when surrounded by genuine luxury rather than cheap imitations. When the fire destroyed Stage 3, thousands of dollars worth of gold leaf literally went up in smoke, though some of it was later recovered from the ashes and melted down for partial insurance compensation. The rebuilt sets used less expensive alternatives for most surfaces, which is why some scenes in Darkness's palace look noticeably different in terms of lighting and texture compared to others. Number 11. The dancing scene took 2 months to film. The hauntingly beautiful ballroom sequence where Darkness seduces Lily with dancing took an astonishing 2 months to complete, making it one of the longest single sequences ever filmed for any movie. Mia Sara had no professional dance training before Legend, so production had to hire championship ballroom dance instructors to teach her classical waltz and contemporary movement for 8 hours daily for 6 weeks before shooting even began. Tim Curry, trapped in his elaborate Darkness costume and makeup, could barely move naturally, let alone dance gracefully. The massive horns on his head completely threw off his balance and center of gravity, causing him to stumble repeatedly during early rehearsals. Choreographers had to completely redesign the dance around Curry's physical limitations, creating movements that looked elegant and menacing while actually being extremely simple and carefully balanced steps. The ballroom set was the largest interior set built for the film, measuring over 8,000 square feet, but the elaborate costumes and prosthetics required such careful lighting that only a small portion could be lit properly at any given time. This meant shooting the dance in tiny fragments, sometimes just 3 to 5 seconds of usable footage per day. The dress Mia Sara wears during the sequence weighed 47 pounds, and had a 16-foot train that required 3 crew members to manipulate off-camera during takes. Ridley Scott shot the sequence with multiple cameras from 13 different angles, generating over 70 hours of raw footage that was later edited down to the 5-minute sequence audiences see in the final film. Number 10. Meg Mucklebones was played by a man.
Sour-tasting berry!
That terrifying swamp hag who tries to eat Jack isn't played by a woman at all. Meg Mucklebones was portrayed by Robert Picardo, a male actor who later became famous as the Doctor on Star Trek Voyager. Ridley Scott specifically wanted a male performer because he believed a man's larger frame and deeper voice would make the character more physically imposing and genuinely frightening. Picardo spent 7 hours in makeup each day he worked, enduring a full-body prosthetic suit that made him look like a rotting, waterlogged corpse. The swamp water was actually a mixture of oatmeal, green food coloring, and chemical thickeners that smelled absolutely putrid under the hot studio lights. Picardo had to submerge himself repeatedly in this disgusting mixture while delivering his lines, and the prosthetics absorbed the liquid, making the costume gain an additional 30 pounds throughout each shooting day. The actress originally cast for the role quit after 1 day because she couldn't handle the claustrophobic prosthetics and foul-smelling water. Picardo's willingness to endure these conditions made him Scott's favorite supporting player, and the director praised his commitment to making Meg truly monstrous rather than campy. Number 9. Tom Cruise did his own stunts and nearly died. Tom Cruise's legendary reputation for doing his own stunts began with legend, and it nearly killed him multiple times. During the underwater sequence where Jack searches for the ring, Cruise actually held his breath for over 2 minutes while swimming through a specially constructed tank filled with murky, chemically treated water. The scene required 17 takes, meaning Cruise repeatedly pushed his body to dangerous oxygen deprivation levels. Safety divers were stationed throughout the tank, but Cruise refused to use them unless absolutely necessary because he felt breaking character would ruin the scene's authenticity. Even more dangerous were the wirework stunts where Jack leaps through the forest. Cruise insisted on doing these himself rather than using a stunt double, despite having minimal training on wire rigs. During one take, the primary wire snapped mid-flight, and only the backup safety wire prevented Cruise from plummeting 30 feet onto the concrete studio floor. The near-fatal accident was hushed up by production to avoid insurance complications and media scrutiny. Cruise also suffered numerous cuts, bruises, and a cracked rib from repeatedly slamming into trees and rocks during action sequences, but he refused pain medication because he wanted to maintain full physical awareness during filming. Number 8. The goblins were played by little people in backwards costumes.
Magic horn is mine, mine, mine. Now all creatures will love the night.
Those creepy, unsettling goblins that serve darkness weren't created with puppets or stop-motion animation. They were actual performers wearing incredibly elaborate costumes that were engineered backwards to create disturbing, inhuman movements. Ridley Scott wanted the goblins to move in ways that felt wrong and unnatural, so costume designer Charles Node created suits where the performers' heads were actually positioned at chest level, with false goblin heads mounted above on extended neck pieces. This meant the actors were looking out through the costume's chest areas while manipulating the false heads with internal controls. The backwards design forced performers to walk in reverse or sideways to create the goblin's distinctive shuffling gait. 7 little people were hired specifically for these roles because their smaller stature made the forced perspective and proportions work correctly. Each performer spent weeks learning to navigate the set while essentially blind, relying on audio cues from assistants positioned off-camera. The kitchen scene where goblins prepare food required 43 takes because the backwards costumes made it nearly impossible for performers to manipulate props convincingly. Several performers suffered severe back injuries from the unnatural postures required to operate the costumes. The dedication created some of cinema's most uniquely disturbing creatures. Number 7. Mia Sara's black dress was alive with insects. When Lily transforms into her dark, seductive form, she wears a stunning black dress that appears to shimmer and move with supernatural life. That effect isn't special effects or CGI. The dress was actually covered with thousands of real black beetles that were glued onto the fabric in overlapping patterns to create living armor. Costume designer Charles Node wanted the dress to represent Lily's corruption by darkness. And what better way than covering her in creatures that feed on decay? Mia Sara was absolutely terrified of insects and had no idea about the beetles until the day of filming. She nearly refused to wear the dress, and production had to halt for 3 hours while Scott personally convinced her that the beetles were harmless and already dead. The beetles were actually purchased from a taxidermy supply company and had been preserved and treated to prevent decomposition. However, the studio light's heat caused the adhesive to soften, making beetles occasionally fall off during takes, which sent Sara into panic attacks multiple times. The dress required 4 assistants to help Sara put it on and take it off because the weight and stiffness made it impossible to wear without assistance. Close-up shots reveal incredible detail in how the beetle's shells catch light. Number 6. Billy Barty suffered a heart attack on set. Veteran actor Billy Barty, who played the mischievous elf Screwball, suffered a massive heart attack during filming and nearly died on the forest set. Barty was 61 years old during production, and the physically demanding role required him to run, jump, and perform acrobatic movements for hours in the humid, oxygen-depleted environment created by the massive forest set. On day 47 of shooting, Barty collapsed between takes and went into full cardiac arrest. The on-set medic and paramedics performed emergency CPR for 8 minutes before his heart restarted. He was rushed to hospital where doctors discovered severe coronary blockage requiring immediate surgery. Ridley Scott felt tremendous guilt about pushing the elderly actor so hard and wanted to recast the role, but Barty insisted on returning to complete his scenes after just 3 weeks of recovery. The production completely restructured the remaining screwball scenes to minimize physical exertion, using stunt doubles for any running or jumping. Several scenes were rewritten to have Screwball injured or tired, providing in-story justification for Barty's reduced mobility. Despite the near-death experience, Barty later called Legend one of his favorite projects and praised Scott's willingness to accommodate his recovery. His determination to finish the film demonstrated the old-school professionalism that defined his 5-decade career. Number 5. The film was banned in several countries. Legend faced outright bans and censorship in multiple countries due to its dark religious imagery and satanic themes. The film was completely banned in Ireland for 3 years because the Catholic Church declared it blasphemous and dangerous to Christian values. The Irish Film Censor's Office specifically cited darkness's appearance as a glorification of Satan and claimed the film promoted occult practices to impressionable young viewers. In Malaysia and Indonesia, the film was banned permanently and remains unavailable to this day because Islamic authorities determined it violated religious law by depicting demonic entities in sympathetic or powerful ways. Several Middle Eastern countries refused to grant the film distribution rights. Even in countries where Legend wasn't banned outright, it faced severe editing requirements. The Australian Classification Board initially gave it an R rating, restricting it to adults only, until cuts were made to reduce disturbing imagery. Germany required removal of several scenes showing goblin violence and all close-ups of Darkness's face during the seduction sequence. South Korea demanded the entire character of Darkness be digitally darkened in post-production to make him less visually explicit. These international controversies actually hurt the film's financial performance even more than the domestic box office failure, eliminating potential revenue from major markets and reinforcing Legend's reputation as uncommercial and unmarketable. Number 4. There are 7 different versions of the film. Legend exists in 7 distinctly different versions, making it one of cinema's most fragmented and confusing releases. The original European theatrical cut ran 113 minutes with Jerry Goldsmith's orchestral score. The American theatrical cut was 90 minutes with Tangerine Dream's electronic score and significantly altered editing. The television broadcast version added back some deleted scenes but censored violence and created a 101-minute hybrid. The first director's cut, released in 2002, ran 113 minutes and restored Goldsmith's score but used different edits than the European version. The Ultimate Edition DVD, released in 2011, included yet another cut with restored scenes never seen before. A Japanese Laserdisc version contains unique edits not found anywhere else. Finally, streaming services currently offer a 109-minute version that combines elements from multiple cuts. Each version creates a fundamentally different viewing experience with altered pacing, emotional tone, and even plot coherence. Fans have spent decades debating which version represents Ridley Scott's true vision, but Scott himself has given contradictory answers in various interviews. The fragmentation occurred because Universal Studios never properly archived the original film elements, and different international distributors made their own unauthorized edits. This chaotic release history means that depending on when and where you watched Legend, you might have seen a completely different movie than someone else. Number 3. The unicorn horn sold for over $100,000. One of the original unicorn horns used in Legend sold at auction in 2014 for $123,000, making it one of the most expensive movie props ever sold publicly. The horn was purchased by an anonymous collector who outbid several museums and celebrity fans during a heated 3-hour auction. This particular horn was the hero prop used for all close-up shots and was hand-sculpted from aircraft aluminum with a pearl-infused resin coating that gave it the magical, iridescent quality seen on screen. It contained the 47 individual moving parts that allowed it to spiral and catch light realistically. The prop had been stored in Ridley Scott's personal collection for nearly 30 years before he decided to sell several legend items to fund his production company. The sale price shocked the entertainment memorabilia world because fantasy film props typically sell for much less than science fiction pieces. However, Legend's cult status and the unicorn's iconic imagery drove the price to record levels. The auction house authenticated the prop using production photographs and Scott's personal documentation. 2 other unicorn horns from the film exist in private collections, but this was the only screen-used hero prop ever offered publicly. The buyer reportedly plans to display it in a private cinema dedicated to 80s fantasy films. Number 2. Tim Curry created Darkness's voice by smoking. Tim Curry's unforgettable demonic voice for Darkness wasn't created with electronic effects or post-production manipulation. Curry achieved that deep, rumbling, seductive tone by literally smoking cigarettes continuously during filming to deliberately damage his vocal cords. Before production began, Curry worked with a vocal coach to develop techniques for safely lowering his voice's pitch, but he wasn't satisfied with the results. He wanted Darkness to sound genuinely inhuman and threatening, not just like a man speaking in a lower register. Against medical advice and the coach's recommendations, Curry began chain smoking during rehearsals to create persistent inflammation and irritation in his throat. The temporary damage lowered his natural speaking voice by nearly a full octave and added the gravelly, menacing texture that became Darkness's signature sound. Curry smoked approximately 2 packs per day during the 3 months of filming his scenes, causing severe throat pain and chronic coughing. The production kept this secret because it violated safety protocols and could have created liability issues if Curry suffered permanent damage. Ridley Scott was initially unaware of Curry's method and was shocked when he discovered it, but by then the character's voice was so perfect that he couldn't ask Curry to change approaches. After filming wrapped, Curry required medical treatment and months of voice therapy to restore his normal vocal range. Number 1. Ridley Scott considers it his biggest artistic failure. Despite Legend's cult classic status and the passionate fan base it eventually developed, Ridley Scott has repeatedly called it his greatest artistic failure and the most painful experience of his directing career. In interviews over the past 4 decades, Scott has expressed deep regret about Legend, not because of the film itself, but because he allowed studio interference to destroy his original vision. Scott has stated that the 3-hour version he initially delivered was the most personal and meaningful work he'd ever created, representing his attempt to craft a genuine, dark fairy tale that balanced childlike wonder with adult themes of temptation and corruption. When Universal forced him to cut 90 minutes and then replaced his chosen musical score without permission, Scott felt betrayed and artistically violated. He's compared the experience to having his artistic soul surgically removed. The director's cut, released decades later, partially addressed these issues, but Scott maintains that approximately 40 minutes of crucial footage was permanently lost when Universal destroyed the original film elements, meaning his true vision can never be fully restored. Scott has said that Legend's failure taught him never to trust studios completely and directly influenced how he negotiated creative control on his later films like Gladiator and The Martian. Despite its beautiful visuals and memorable performances, Scott views Legend as proof that commercial pressures can destroy even the most passionate artistic efforts. And there you have it, 20 secrets about Legend that transform this cult classic from a simple fantasy film into a tragic story of artistic compromise and production nightmares. Which fact shocked you most? Drop a comment below, smash that like button, and subscribe for more hidden movie secrets. Let's keep the magic alive.